Tuesday, August 8, 2017, work session is now called to order. Mr. Taylor, you said you wanted Mr. Bradford to...
Yeah, just, we're started tonight's the first night for our new recording system, so I wanted Ed to take a minute and explain it to council.
So Central Interconnect was here on Thursday and Friday installing the new video recording system. You can see there's one camera in back and there's one camera that they mounted over there. They had to run a fair amount of wiring. They had to put some new equipment in the rack inside. They get that all taken care of, and then the afternoon on Friday and part of the morning Monday was spent on finishing the programming, doing some testing, and then training for staff. And so this will be the trial run for this system tonight, but we're pretty pleased with at least the trial runs. We'll work out the logistics of getting those videos to Keith so they can get up on the TV too and on the on the PEG website. And then later down the road, we'll decide if we want to host a city YouTube channel or some other way of hosting those ourselves as well. But for right now, it's going to be just taking the place of PEG. So we're pretty happy with that.
So we're going to experiment a little bit. We got to just work with this system in meetings to determine what views we're going to use, because that camera will go directly on the podium, but from the back camera you still can see the person speaking and hearing them. So we're going to play on how we're going to use the cameras, but we're real pleased with the clarity. I think it's going to be a good system for the community.
Can you move that around? Does it, is there a remote there?
They are pan tilt zoom, so
Okay.
you can zoom in and stuff, but we tried to set it with presets, so there's just a few keystrokes to record the meetings, because the clerk is probably gonna be the one running it, and they're also gonna be taking minutes, so we tried to make it as simple as possible. I also have the ability to run it, or anybody else, from your iPhone if you're sitting in the back of the room, so we're just gonna have to play it by ear to see what's gonna work best. But there shouldn't have to be very many keystrokes in the course of a meeting, unless it's a very complicated meeting, and then there might be a little bit more.
Okay.
When we look at some other meetings that take place in the council chambers, such as the DDA meeting tomorrow, Planning Commission, Historic District Commission, and such as that, I know the Planning Commission and Historic District Commission use the same arrangement that council uses, but the DDA uses tables out in the middle of the floor. Will we be able to capture those, or is there some training or an operator that needs to be available to handle that?
Somebody will have to operate the system. We can, it's best if the boards and commissions can sit up front, because that's where all the presets. If they're not, then somebody's gonna have to have a little more training, and there's gonna have to be somebody made available to do that if those are meetings that we wanna record.
I would feel most comfortable if we work out the bugs with the council meetings first before we turn it loose on other meetings. But that was one of the considerations when we talked about this as an option to PEG, is that we could televise more meetings.
Okay,
But we need to work out the bugs.
okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Work session items. We've got a number of them on here: discussion of recycling center, discussion of traffic speed on First Street, discussion of transportation improvement plan and ways to address streets faster, discussion on blights and ordinance procedures, and discussion on redevelopment liquor licenses. But we'll start with public comments on work session related items. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to items on the agenda tonight? If not, we'll move on to the first item. Discussion on the recycling centers, and this item was requested by Councilmember Mark Whitliff.
Thank you. The reason I brought this up is a couple different things. It's first was the cameras. When we originally approved the movement of the recycle center, the cameras that we have were going to be high clarity and be able to capture license plates. I'd like to have a video of that. I think Jeff has that ready. And the other point is, now with Manistee Township canceling their recycle program due to trash being left, that they're running into numerous dollars to get rid of it. That's what worries me, that the city is going to have spend a lot of money that we shouldn't, that we can put into other areas like streets or something else. So this is up for discussion with the council. Your thoughts and views on that? So Jeff, take her away.
I'm looking for a location here where I can show you all 3 cameras as it's been recorded today.
Am I gonna be on there?
Could be. What time
Okay.
are you there?
I wasn't there today, so.
Okay. So this is a live recording, about 4:30 this afternoon. This is our highest resolution camera. And this is a recording, so when we see that there's somebody that's violated the rules or put trash out there or something, this is what we do, is go back through a time frame and we try to isolate down to where we can see where the material has been placed, and then look at specific vehicles to try to tie them to it. So that's one view. We also have, that's the same view. So this is about at the same time. It gives us a long view of where our topsoil is, the brush, and then the yard waste, and then these are the fiber containers. Another one at the entrance.
You can just select the camera and you can find it. Recycle entry.
So here's an example of somebody that's pulling in. Depending on the day, the time of day with the sunlight and so forth, oftentimes we can pull those license plates, sometimes we cannot. We've actually stopped several people, or when we found that they were abusing the site, been able to contact them directly. A couple times we've worked with the police officers. Sometimes when we're just out there, we've talked to them. We actually found some material that had an address on it last week, and we're able to go talk to the owners of that. I would say that since we've moved the recycling center away from the city garage, the majority of the problem and abuse has gone away for us. It tends to be cleaner. Almost all of you have called Kathy or called the Public Works office to let us know that there's been some trash deposited or there's a dumpster overflowing. We'll send our guys out there to pick it up. But it is far less what it was when it was in the yard and wide open. I think just having its own place, keeping it clean, if we keep it clean, it seems to stay cleaner. If you let one person put trash out, it seems like the next one adds more, the next one adds more. So that diligence. We also have a lot of residents that care about it, don't want to see it abused, don't want to lose it, and so they call all the time when they see stuff. And we probably have to remove items, a couple times a week.
I just want to protect the city, or have the city protected from spending money that we don't need to spend. I guess if we have to spend the money, is there a way that we could get a higher clarity camera, like on the photo that you just had, one with the check, to really get the license plate numbers?
One of the cameras is a higher resolution than this one. So we can always look at swapping them out, changing them, because just a little bit more resolution would make that much easier to read.
Mm-hmm.
Should we post item, right?
No, go ahead.
No. Yep.
Okay.
We've only had, just to give you a little bit of background, this center operates 24/7, 7 days a week, all day long. The commingled container that's on the screen is a 30-yard for plastic metal, and that gets dumped 2 days a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. We've got 5 8-yard containers for the fiber, the cardboard and paper, and those get emptied 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Since we moved to this location, I think that we've seen an uptick in the numbers and the participation in using that site. So what we've tried to do is look at what Republic's normal pickup cycles are on. They don't pick up fiber every day, so we optimized the number of containers with the number of cycles that they come and remove it. And so far this year, we've only had 1 point where we've had stuff that was overflowing. And I think Councilman Smith, Mayor Smith actually called that in. And when we tracked it down, we found that it was a commercial business that had a big sale, and they had a big rush of boxes that came in. So we were able to talk to that business, and so I kind of see that as a little isolated incident.
Has Republic mentioned in the commingle bin that, you know, there's styrofoam, there's plastic, there's other impurities in there rather than glass and metal?
My understanding is that's the case that Manistee Township was dealing with, was people putting in stuff that contaminated that load, so there was too much in there for them to be able to sort it and recycle it properly. And once it gets contaminated, it has to be landfilled. I'm not aware of any of our loads that have been pulled that have been rejected.
Okay.
I think Manistee Township's issue was that they were getting that actual garbage dumped into recycle in addition to the recycled materials, and a lot of trash dumped that was not approved recycled material.
Right.
That was their big issue with theirs, and it was causing them to incur additional expense and such. What's the, yeah, I recently got an email, so did Mayor Pro Tem Zelinski, concerning a commercial business. What's the restriction on use of the recycle for taxpayers in the city of Manistee?
As far as I understand, this is a resident-only recycling center. And I actually met with Republic last week on a separate item. They said that if you add commercial use to the recycling centers, they just don't work. The volume's too great, and it just causes issues. So
Well,
this
I'm
has
aware
been
of a number of commercial concerns that use the recycle center, some of them on a stated daily basis. So apparently people aren't aware that there's a restriction. I wasn't aware that there was a restriction to residential only. It's not posted, is it?
I don't know if I think we put it on the signs out there, but I can't say that for sure. So, I mean, we can research that and do some more education on the purpose and intent and who it's for.
Yeah, typically downtown, they have, I think Catholic Central, Mark Madreski was doing that for a while and picking up the cardboard. I don't know who's doing it now. Question for Jeff, have we fined anybody for illegal dumping trash or anything like that? Yeah.
We have not fined anybody. We've given out warnings at this point.
Okay. And have those people gone away?
We haven't caught anybody twice yet.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't want the city spending money because a month ago, there was a open letter in the paper, and I think everybody knows who wrote it. He's an advocate about Quincy Street and about my concern about the recycle center versus streets. If we're spending money taking care of somebody's trash, we're not gonna have the money to take care of other things in the city. I hope he realizes that, so.
And the city operates this like an enterprise zone. I don't know if it's officially an enterprise zone.
Well, the recycling center is paid for out of the refuse fund, so those dollars couldn't go towards streets
Okay.
anyway. They're not commingleable.
Yeah, they're separate pots of money.
I have a question. I took a trip to Filer Township over the weekend and visited the city dump.
All the way? Was it 2
And-
days?
Well, it was an adventure. I mean, I did not realize how big it was out there. And
Our compost area?
yes,
Okay.
compost area. and saw the enormous amount of yard bags that you have out there, and saw the compost piles, and drove around. So I'm curious, how many times do you have to go out there to dump yard waste?
Our normal collection for yard waste is on Tuesdays. So we will run the entire city on Tuesdays. We have one crew that gets dedicated to that, and they just make hauls back and forth all day long. If they don't complete the entire circuit of the city, then they continue on Wednesday or until they're finished. Usually we can get that in about a day. Our normal day for chipping brush is on Fridays. So on Fridays, unless we compile a list, if you're having your brush picked up, you call in, we'll add you to the list. Kathy makes a list that improves the efficiency of the crew, so we're not going door to door, street to street. They'd make that route. If we see that route is gonna take more than a day, usually we'll try to start it a little bit earlier, or we'll carry into Monday if necessary. But all the chipped brush that we end up with goes out to that compost area also, and it gets placed in a separate area.
Does that go out on Tuesdays too, or do you do that
That's on
that Friday?
Fridays.
You do it
On
on Friday,
Fridays.
okay.
We also, when we cut the grass in the parks, they bag it, they bag it with the mower. It gets piled up, but we remove all those piles on Fridays also. So there's material that's going out there all the time. The composting operation, we've changed that, so we create those windrows. We're only turning them twice a year now to let them cook, let the biological process work better. I think we've made some better product out of that, and we certainly have a surplus of it now. So that's why we've added some in the bin at the recycling center for residents to pick up, a bucket at a time. It's not for commercial use. But the state also restricts us. We have to fill out reports on volumes and the operation each year. And so you're not allowed to retain more than a certain percentage of what you bring out there annually. So at some point, that stuff could be sold. It could be, we've actually traded topsoil for gravel, and supported some of the street projects.
Yeah, that's, I was getting around to that. I'm gonna ask you what you're gonna do with the extra compost that you're creating out there.
Yeah, in the past, we've always had a project that used it up, but
You're gonna get to that point.
yeah,
Good to know. It's good recycling.
Is there a gate on the entry, or is that just an open fence
at which location?
at the recycle center?
At the recycling center, when we installed the gate, we installed the fence, we did not install a gate.
Okay. Would it be prudent to close it in the evening and open it in the morning?
Well,
Do you think that would lessen the illicit dumping?
I asked Republic what other communities have done when they've run into issues and abuse, and they said that some communities have restricted the times. They gate it, they open it up at, say, 7 in the morning and close it at 7 at night, or other time frames where you've got staff available to do that.
I know we had a recommendation in the last meeting from a citizen to restrict the hours and have it under observation or under watch during the periods it's open. I would not like to see us go too much in that direction to restrict things, because I know myself, for recycling, try and do as much fiber as I can with Catholic Central for their fundraising and such. But sometimes the hours that they have are narrow enough that it's not real convenient. We want to provide a public convenience. We want to encourage people to recycle, but we also want to do it economically, like Councilmember Whitliff is suggesting, to make sure that we're not spending resources in one place that could be better used somewhere else.
The most time, from my perspective, this recycling center is very, very successful, and it's not very taxing since we moved it on my staff. The biggest labor that we have at that recycling center is the brush bin that we put out there. A lot of people will put their brush in there, and it's a product of our success, if you will. And we've discussed it internally on whether or not that was the right move or not. But residents find value in that. If they've got a small group or don't want to leave it out, they cut it on a Saturday, don't want to leave it to the next Friday. And so we're just dealing with it. We're either going to pick it up there or we're going to pick it up on the curb. So, but other than that, I think it's running actually pretty well.
When you've talked to Republic about other options that other communities have tried, have they said anything about when you do close the recycling centers in other communities, do people pile up trash outside the gate? I would be a little bit concerned about that.
I didn't have that specific conversation, but they said ultimately what communities will go to is the totes, is going to every resident has a tote, and it gets picked up curbside. I mean, that's the ultimate solution to it. But it's a $3 a month cost.
And it looks bad all over the streets as they go through their process of picking them up. They won't get them all picked up in one day.
In the bigger boxes, TVs, computers, whatever, people don't break down, they'll be blowing all over. And that's, if we chose to gate the recycle center, that scares me. You have $1 million houses just over the berm and businesses, and I'd hate to see cardboard and cans and bottles and styrofoam blowing over the berm, especially if we get an east wind down the way, down Golczewski Drive. So, I don't know, what's council's feel on this?
I think there's enough council members that frequent the area and recycle themselves and keep their attention on the area and express their concerns that we continue to refine the process and potentially take measures that make sure it's manageable. Bigger containers. I'm personally aware that the commercial business that took cardboard and put it beside the bin because the bins were full returned to put them in the bins once they'd been emptied. They had no intention of littering the area. I get concerned. Businesses pay for refuse as well as the residences in town. We pay both in a monthly fee and as a millage. Again, I was personally not aware that businesses were restricted and it was a residential-only recycle area. Education is probably one of the keys to it, and perseverance. I certainly would speak to an individual if they were out there putting items that weren't authorized and using it as a dump, because that was the issue we had with the city garage location. People sticking things back behind the bin, car seats, and just anything else that they thought they could get away with. I think it's a continuing concern, and we should stay focused on it.
Well, I think switching the cameras out, like Jeff suggested, would be helpful to try that out, so there's a couple things we can do now.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay.
It's okay.
Do we pay Republic for the service? I'm confused about, do we get anything back for the recycle that they gather, or is it, we get nothing?
Our contract with Republic, we pay them every time they make a pull. So every time they pull one of those containers and empties it, we pay that on every month. So each time, let's say that we had an extra pull, and for some reason we had a weekend where we had to do all the cardboard 4 times a week instead of 3, we will pay 4 extra pulls for that.
There's a lot of people that recycle, and I just happen to know there were 2 cars that were there that I know don't live in the city that were recycling. Do we care?
I think we should care, and I've seen many people that I know from both Filer Township and Manistee Township in there and have tried to politely mention that this is paid for by the city residents and taxpayers. And when I asked Republic about that, they said recycling is kind of like parks and streets. Nobody really sees the boundaries, the political boundaries. But unless you had somebody that had a key fob system or somebody that was there checking IDs and stuff, I'm not sure how you...
Well, you could maybe randomly, if you had a high-resolution camera, you could randomly go through a few every month and see if they are city residents or not. You can find out from the license plate, I guess.
But
I mean,
there are
if
five
you
or-
wanted to go to that extent. I personally feel it's gonna end up someplace. It's either gonna end up in the dump, or it's gonna end up in the recycle, and
Yeah, and I've asked Republic since Manistee Township has closed their center to see if there's any detectable trend upward in our volumes. So they're gonna keep an eye on that for us.
How many bins do we have for fiber?
We currently have 5.
But are there larger bin options?
That's the size that they've recommended, and I've asked them if we get to a point where we start having this overflowing problem, that we would add a 6th bin. It just adds a 6th pole, if you will, every month. So we haven't got to that point yet with the volumes.
Every bin is an individual charge?
Yes.
I think what happens too, a lot of people don't break down the boxes. When they throw them in there, they just throw them in there and it takes up a lot of space. And they fill up quicker. And I don't know if there's nothing that really I don't think you can do about that. It may be education, but breaking them down and, putting them in there would just make a huge difference.
There's a sign on the bin, please break down your cardboard. And I guess people can't read, or they're too lazy. So, but that drives me nuts too. So I pull boxes out and break them down and create more room for people. So just education, curing laziness.
It amazes me, and this is just a comment, how quick that can fill up. I go down one morning with a bunch of recycles, and my wife is fanatic about cleaning everything, and everything is spotless when it leaves. In the afternoon, I made another trip, and I could not believe how full that glass and metal bin was, just in a day's time. I mean, it just was amazed me.
One other thing that I would point out is the city is represented on a multi-county collaborative called the Regional Resource Recovery Team. And so we're exploring as a region ways to improve and enhance recycling, reduce cost, improve the amount and types of recycling that we're doing. And we're also sharing ideas and collaborating on how people have success stories and issues. And so I think that's been very helpful to us, and we'll continue to work with them.
I know at one time they talked about the option of everybody having a tote. Do we include that in the analysis when you're talking about how many totes we should have and whether or not we should maybe be looking at?
Well, right now, I believe the cost, if you wanted to have one at your house, is $6, and you've got one.
Yeah, it's
correct?
about $7 a month.
7.
I have one.
And how often do those get pulled? Twice a month?
Yep, twice a month, one, I think the first
So
week
first and
and the third.
first and third weeks.
I would fill that up in a week or less, that tote, so.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would. I pay for a tote for refuse and typically put out one bag. If I had a recycled tote, I would probably fill that up quicker than I would the regular garbage tote. But I think working toward things, there's places that collect the fiber and make money on that as a fundraising activity, and we as a city pay to have it removed. Perhaps in the future, as they look at the regional recycling center options and stuff that have been discussed in the past, we're getting in a position where we're able to make some money on it as opposed to pay to have it serviced.
Yeah, my understanding, I don't have the exact numbers, but my understanding is the fiber isn't a big expense to us because there is a value to them to sell locally. I've heard the plant manager from PCA talk about their program, and they actually lose money on that program, but they do it to support the schools and want to continue that. So it's kind of a give back from that industry.
Well, I know the PCA has a trailer out at the casino but I don't know if they charge them or not for that. Would that be something?
And the Little River Band is also a member of that Regional Resource Recovery, so I think you'll see more things happen. The ultimate goal of the RRR is to find a way to make recycling an industry. So not just how do we help residents recycle, but how do we create industry out of it and create jobs out of it? And so we're progressing pretty well through that.
I had a quick, just final question from me. Do you see that we're emptying the bins more frequently in the summertime than in the wintertime? Is it a seasonal?
I haven't looked at those trends, but I know that we've overflowed one time this year.
Yeah, I was just curious, with all the people that we have in the summertime.
We can look back at the history and see if there's a month-by-month trend.
Probably would be a good thing to know.
So we're going to relocate, switch out cameras, have the higher, can't think now, but.
Resolution.
Thank you. Resolution camera moved.
I think we can look at adding a new higher resolution and then using the one that's there to repurpose elsewhere. Is that fair?
I think I would just swap the two and see if it works right now.
Okay.
We've got three, we've got good coverage. One of them is, we could put here and try that and see if it works. That's
Okay.
the cheapest thing.
Could I ask that, once that camera is switched in operating correctly, could we get a video sent to each member of council, please?
Yeah, or we can bring this up again and show everybody in a
Okay.
council work session or something. It's probably easier because they're kind of big files.
Okay, that'll be great. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sater, could we look at perhaps working with the News Advocate or other media to get an article on recycling and what the city rules are? I think that goes a long way towards educating people as to what the use is and what's appropriate.
Right? We can make that happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on recycling? Thank you, Joe. Our next item for discussion will be discussion on traffic speeds on First Street. Councilmember Aaron Pontiac.
Yeah, I was just concerned about having, I know there's speed limit signs around the circles at the beach, but I was more thinking about the actual main street, First Street, right before the islands, so people know when they're entering that it should be 15, not during their drive, because we still get a lot of,
Steve's here to address those.
okay.
There is some signage down there that are 15. I do not believe them are legal signs. I don't believe that we can enforce some signs according to state law.
Okay.
That falls back on the governing agency that has authority on them roads. Usually means 55 and 25 for residential. That street that goes along down by the pier is actually called South Lakeshore Road, or Lakeshore Drive, which is actually a designated street. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that would mean that would be a prima facie area, which means 25 miles an hour. That 15 miles an hour was posted, I don't know if you remember when Harbor Village started, and there was a lot of similar complaints about speed of 25 or plus. So they went and put 15 miles and up there, but we could not enforce them. So basically if we stop a vehicle that's in there going over the posted speed limit of that 15, it would be technically a legal stop, and we could not issue them a ticket and enforce that. A lot of things that we need to look at is some of the first things that people tell us, that person is going 40 miles an hour down there. I sit down there a lot in the mornings, usually around that 9 o'clock when there's quite a bit of traffic down there. If you're sitting down there on a straightaway and you see a car coming around a corner, around the turn, making the loop, you think, wow, that car's speeding. But you hit the radar, and as soon as they come around there, they're in that 25 mile an hour zone. It just looks a little bit faster when they're going around there. We do spend some time down there. I do put the radar trailer down there a lot for a lot of our events. It's on First Street quite a bit. We have to have some recharging time on that. The key to that whole success of traffic enforcement, which is a secondary issue for us in the police department, and manpower is the key for any type of traffic enforcement. As you know, that we're down a few right now. So obviously traffic enforcement, and another issue I'm sure we're going to talk about shortly is blight. Them are secondary to our major complaints that we have going on right now.
So on the loop around First Street, the real speed is 25?
25 residential, similar down to like downtown. It's an actual street, would be 25 miles an hour.
So there's no way to enforce or change that?
To decrease the speed down to 15 miles an hour?
Decrease the speed. to
Decrease?
15.
That would be a question for Mr. Saylor. I don't believe that is possible. That would be something that is usually set by MDOT or the Michigan State Police that govern the roads, county road commissions.
It's usually, or it is addressed in the motor vehicle code or the uniform traffic code that residential streets are 25 miles an hour, and I'm not aware of a process to reduce that. I mean, we can ask the city attorney if there is.
I believe downtown Traverse City going through downtown is 15.
Yeah, well, they have it posted anyways.
So
Yeah, they were posted.
now is it real or is it,
And
genie
they
in a
have your-
bottle?
You gotta stop for pedestrians, but
Like instances on our highway, we have 40 miles an hour. It's a designated 40 mile an hour zone there, but then we bump it down to 30 miles an hour for a school zone. That is covered under the motor vehicle code.
Would speed bumps help?
Speed bumps, the issue that we'd have down there is we have a boat launch. People with
Oh,
bringing their
right.
trailers come, and then what we do when winter comes for snow plowing in that area, for people to have
Forget
access
about
to
the
that.
trailers.
So there's not a lot of options. I try to get my guys down there as much as I can, but we're a little thin, and it's been a busy summer. It sure has. And the radar trailer will deter them for a little bit. Then you have them certain people that want to see how fast that really goes. So unless that we're there at all times, we thought about the process of putting a patrol car out there. That's only going to last, and let it sit there, but that's only going to last for about a couple, 3 days, and people realize there's not a car, somebody in there. So
Some
This
of the,
might be kind of, I'm just gonna say it. Can we move one of the signs and just put it at First Street? Even though a lot of people don't know that it's not actually 15. Cause I mean, why do we have it there anyways, if it's not even?
the issue would be is
I know we can't
the
enforce
issue you
it,
look back
but-
on there is become who's going to be liable if there's a traffic accident there. When somebody comes and says, "Hey, that car was going at least 25 miles an hour," okay, then we knowingly know that we have a sign up there that's 15 miles an hour, 10 miles under the regular prima facie speed limit. That means, on the face of it was prima facie. I mean, 25. So does the liability fall back on us knowing that we have an illegal sign there?
So why are they still up then?
It's a good question, and I'm sure myself and the director will have a discussion about that, and also
Not
our
that I
chief
don't
of
want it
police.
up, but
Yeah. Enforcement. 4 years ago, if I look at the city dashboard, there were over 1,000 citations issued by the police department. Last year, there were 244.
Mhm.
I personally observe a lot of people exceeding the speed limit. You may be going 25 mile an hour speed limit. I've actually had people pass me on residential streets in the city because I was going the speed limit. Where are we manpower-wise compared to 4 or 5 years ago? We added a police officer 3 years ago.
Yeah,
To the
shortly,
staff?
right between that range of 2 to 3 years ago. Yeah, probably looking back to that 5-year period, we're probably down 2. I know within that 10-year period, we had 3 actual road sergeants out, and we had 2 to 3 people on shift.
And would that account for that drastic a drop in citations issued? I know
believe-
people aren't driving any better, so.
That is correct. They're not. But you look at what the amount of complaints. Our complaints are pretty much staying, in line there. But it's the type of complaint that we're working on. We've had a lot more serious complaints out there. Likewise too, if we have less manpower there that we don't have. I try to have when we're full staff, have kind of like a flat person. A 3 to 3 to get out there and do traffic enforcement, but then the problem is you run into somebody sick, a vacation day, or an injury, and then that just throws the whole thing out because then we're covering different shifts.
Another contributing factor, and I've had this discussion with the prior chief and the current chief, Kozel, is the fact that apparently the department used to have Secretary of Support that would do the reports for the officers, they would dictate them. That position was eliminated, so that means that the officers are in the station longer doing their own reports and all the associated paperwork. So that takes away from the hours that they're available for patrol. So that's another contributing factor.
There's no automated process, no ability to do that while they're on patrol or parked watching for speeders? I mean, efficiencies.
The issue with that is that there are some programs for our in-car mobile computers. The issue becomes an officer safety. If we have an officer staring at a keyboard while sitting on the side of the road or on the highway or in an area, in a business area, or even down at the beach because it's quite a bit of traffic down there, our officer cannot be aware of their surroundings, what's going on when they have their head down into that computer. Does it put officers back on the street? Yes, it does, but I believe personally, and Chief Colesville, me and him had that discussion, that becomes an officer safety issue. We did have transcriptionists in the past, as the city manager stated. When we do, let me just give you an example of a drunk driver. I mean, from the time of the stop to the time we take them out to the jail and come back and type that report, we're looking at 3.5 to 4 hours out of our shift. The average call depends on, could be an hour for each report.
Thank you.
Steve, on the south end of First Street Beach,
Okay.
around the tennis courts and such, it was mentioned about speed bumps. Is there a way that we could put portable speed bumps out there just for the summer? I mean, to slow, because it bottlenecks at the beach house and continues south. It just bottlenecks. Is there a way that could be done?
One of the things that, there are other techniques along with speed bumps that are used for what the industry calls traffic calming. And if you think about both of our beach areas, we use islands to separate the lanes of traffic. It gives a sense of narrowness, and it tends to psychologically slow vehicles down. Not every time, but that's part of the purpose of those islands. Also, the crosswalks that are put on gives you a different visual barrier, and even that sound, that little clicking of going over those. That's why those were added on both First Street and on Cherry Street. So as we get to the point where we're ready to improve the roads in those, especially at First Street in those loops, I think some of those types of traffic calming techniques can be added to improve parking down there, create some sense of narrowness, if you will, that while it still maintains safety, tends to reduce some speeds. The temporary speed bumps could be an option. Certainly, I wouldn't want them there during the winter. That won't work.
Yeah, the mobile ones you just put in, or even, putting some painting, watch out for pedestrians, when you're entering that zone off First Street when you take a left. I know the road's kind of beat up, but just to slow people down because there's so many little kids running back and forth and people not paying attention.
We also had an MDOT audit. I can't remember what it was. It was a rideability audit that was requested by the Non-Motorized Transportation Committee quite a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And particularly on that loop, we had always striped no parking on the inside. And they recommended striping that on the outside because all of the uses, or most of the uses, are on the outside. All the parking lots exit off. And so we've kind of let some of that old striping wear off. And I'd like to work with the engineers to come up with a different striping plan. I think we can actually add some more parking spaces down there. And maybe we can incorporate some of those crosswalk paintings and so forth. That'll
Until we
improve
can
that.
get monies to, do the street.
Well, my big concern was the straightaway in between where the new park is and then the beach. Like that area can go people go fast down that, and there's no.
But if they go under 25 miles an hour, then nothing you do about it.
Yeah, I know. That's
You know
what
what I mean? So,
So if there's, can we, with the speed bumps he was talking about too, can we do something down there or move them around? Because people already know that would think that it's 15 in those loops, but they don't think that in the straightaway there.
Well, then again, we, as Jeff mentioned about boaters, because when you exit the parking lot, you have to go all the way around,
Oh, that's
and
true.
you're banging up your boat, especially if they're not tightened down enough, they're gonna be bouncing around, so.
And the good thing down there is we don't have a lot of reported accidents. Like the last probably major accident that we had there was about a year ago this past July during the fireworks when we had a stolen vehicle down there. That's probably the only
Oh,
one.
my
that come-
break-in,
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's probably the only one that really stands out, that there was some actual damage to vehicles and things like that.
Stood out to me.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of accidents down there, even though that we perceive that there are some speeders down there. And I'd be more than happy to, when we have some free time, to get some people down there so we can see if that can eliminate some of that for you. Not a problem. And I can actually move that radar trailer further down into that loop. I can put it down there closer to the hotel on that straightaway there.
Yeah.
Maybe that educate some people if they do see the sign. Problem is, what we're going to have a 25-mile-an-hour sign down there, and we have so we're going to have to get that worked out a little bit before we put that down there.
Does that register the speed? Do you have any, can you get any stats from that machine?
That machine right there is older. Back about 10 years ago when we had that, there are some functions for that. The additional computer equipment and updates for that yearly got to be pretty costly, so we use it more as an educational of what the speed limit is compared to a statistics. Early on, we did a lot of statistics in areas such as Washington Street, First Street, Fifth Avenue. I know we had it on Maple Street. Somebody called a lot on 6th Street. And we actually had it out there because they thought, everybody's going 40 to 60 miles an hour. And we found that there was a very minimum amount of anybody going over that posted speed limit of 25.
How about Cherry Street?
Cherry Street, I do not know if we had it up there, but that
Especially
was
coming down the hill from the country club towards First Street.
correct.
A lot of those traffic counts were to support grant
Mm-hmm.
projects to rebuild the roads and such.
So, I mean, with Lighthouse Park right across the street from Lighthouse Landing, you get children out in the parking area or children that walk over there or ride their bikes over there. That would be a pretty important area. And I think, as Councilmember Whitliff has pointed out before, when we get onto Maple Street, especially as we start approaching the opening of the school season again, that's another thing that you kind of want to set the tone for from the beginning of the year and carry through, that there'll be a presence and there'll be enforcement, and we want it to be safe for the children that are going in and out of the school.
I find it difficult for the enforcement on First Street. Being in a position to do enforcement is very difficult because it is long and you can see a long ways.
You can.
But I want to just give you some feedback on the sign that you put by my house.
Okay.
For a while, it was kind of a joke. Not a joke because the sign was there, but it was kind of funny to watch people putting their brakes on. Like this one, they would see it. And then, as you say, as time went on, they knew there were no consequences for that. But it was not uncommon to see 40, 45 miles an hour down through there. And I know it's difficult to set up there because they can see you.
Correct.
Do we have like a radar gun or
We
anything?
do
or
have a
laser?
handheld laser radar.
So we
Yeah.
could set up, put a car block off and somebody could stand there and,
That would be possible. The normal procedure for a radar unit is to put it out, educate, and then go enforce.
okay.
The enforce part takes manpower, obviously.
Sure, I'm not,
And when you're using laser radar, unless you want to be caught like right off the bat, if you did it solo, laser, stop, then you're had for that whole area for the rest of the day. The idea with the laser radars, a lot of people will do is we'll do like a kind of like a wolf pack. So we'll have people set up on side streets if we have extra manpower.
Sure.
One will laser, the other one will go stop.
yeah, no, it may be just my past experience of that. We've done that occasionally in areas. You do it one time and you may not do it again for, till the next year. But sometimes just that one initial.
That's all usually it takes.
That's all it takes for the word to get out that, watch, there might be a guy standing by that brown building, with a radar gun.
Right, and that would be my worry if we wrote somebody for that 15-mile-an-hour speed limit down there and they took it to court. And all of a sudden they won because they knew that wasn't a legal sign. And that would be out on social media faster than us telling people to educate them that it's a 25-mile-an-hour zone, so.
Right, well, people can just watch this video now and find out. So I'm kind of disappointed in that, but thinking it was 15.
And I know you can't be at every place, I'm not trying to criticize or be critical, but I know that First Street is an issue. I know there is problems. Last night, there were 2 motorcycles racing down through there. And again, I could call, but I can't get a license plate, and by the time I call you, they're going anyway. It's just, a lot of it is luck and being at the right place at the right time.
That is correct.
I did see one of the, our city police cars did make a quick U-turn yesterday. It did stop somebody that was coming at them. Just happened to catch them at the right time. So I appreciate your efforts. I'm just trying to think of ways that, did they go really fast sometimes?
I'm sure they do sometimes, yeah.
Any more comments?
I do have a question for Jeff, and this goes away from First Street, but this goes to Maple Street about the striping we talked about. Where are we on that?
I was told by the engineers that it's in process, and because I told them that I assured council that we'll have it in place before school opens up.
Okay,
That was a discussion item at this morning's staff meeting.
all right, very good.
By the way, 12th Street looks very nice. Sergeant Spalding, thank you very much
Thank you.
for coming in. Our next item is discussion on transportation improvement plan and ways to address streets faster. Mayor Pro Tem Roger Zielinski brought this item up.
How do we do that, Jeff? Got any suggestions for me?
Simple answer is more money. I think that we have taken, for years, I think the asset management program is probably the best thing that the city of Manistee has done to enhance its street network overall. And it's very tough for a lot of citizens to understand how that's an effective way of managing it, because quite frankly, as a country, we've managed it opposite. We've only rebuilt roads when they're bad, as opposed to trying to preserve the roads, keep them good. And so we're doing a lot more maintenance techniques. We've done crack sealing in the past. Now we're committed to an annual program. We almost have all of our pricing in for this year's and expect to do that during the months of September. You can see the work that we did this spring with the slurry sealing, and it protects that asset. It's not repaving, it's simply protecting streets that are in good condition to add another 6+ years life to them. I think we've been, I think council has added more money to that program. The state of Michigan has added more money to the street program that we get through our Act 51 funds. We're trying to optimize every opportunity we have with developments, with grant opportunities. And I think the techniques that we've chosen are appropriate for the community. The one that I'm not 100% sure on yet is the slurry seal. I want that to go through at least 1 or 2 freeze-thaw cycles in winters to see how it holds up before we invest in that again. So far, we're pleased with it. So I think we've optimized what we've got with the money that we have, and more money is the only other option.
So some of the streets, how many years out are we before we even look at them? Some of our real bad streets. And let's just use Quincy for an example. How far out are we on that street?
Well, it's in the transportation improvement plan as 5 years out today.
Okay.
And some of those streets, and we've got all kinds of information because I wasn't sure exactly what the discussion would be, so
Sure.
we've pulled up quite a bit of stuff. Actually, that got it in right there. If you toggle through a couple. So there's a combination of things, and we've had this discussion before, but honestly, I think the more times we can talk about it, the more the public will understand it. Right now, all of our road money is going into streets that don't require known utility projects below those. And so a lot of times you'll see streets that are gapped out, if you will. And in some of these maps will show where we know that we've got to upgrade the water mains below them. We know we've got to upgrade the sewer mains below some of them. We know some streets, because we've separated the sewers, we've disconnected the catch basins, but they need new storm sewers. 8th Street off of the highway, one of the worst sections that we have, but we can't pave that until we can drain that road properly, and that's adding storm sewer. So we've got to wait for some of that utility money to catch up to the street money to match that out. And some of that is going to require some debt retirement, and also to see how our wet weather corrective action program pans out with the costs.
We're looking at incurring some more debt with the catch basin and closing out the last CSO. What impact that going to have on the streets? And you know, I keep hearing this thing about Quincy State, we got some utility work to do. Do we know what utility work we have to do and what it's gonna cost?
We do, and we've got cost estimates for that. We've actually projected that out years ago, when the residents first began requesting that road be improved. There's some sanitary issues on that. They're not imminent issues that need to be corrected today, but we know that we've got to clean it several times a year because there's some compromised pipes. I think that was televised this year. So we've got better data on what's actually in that pipe, but we've got upgrades to the sanitary sewer included in the budget figures. The biggest issue for utilities on that street is the fact that it's higher than the sidewalks, it's higher than the surrounding areas, and it ought to be the low point where we're not flooding out yards and so forth. So what has always been discussed with that street is lowering it down and adding storm sewer to it, and then doing the sanitary repairs. And we've already the city had that street cored probably 6-7 years ago, and the base is insufficient, so it has to be a full reconstruction, which makes it even more expensive to repair that.
Okay, and maybe, Quincy's probably a bad example, but there are some streets that are bad, but can't you tar and chip them? Isn't there a way to make them a little better while we're waiting 5 or 6 years or whatever it is without putting a lot of expense into it? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how do you keep that road a little bit better? Pretty soon it's gonna be back to gravel.
Right, and what we've done is, and I can get deep into these slides if you want and reference them, but
okay.
There's different points in the structure of the pavement that different techniques will work. You couldn't take a road like Quincy Street, and first of all, the chip sealing program that a lot of counties do, we've selected to not do that in the community for a couple different reasons. One, it provides a very rough, open texture because it's all sharp stone, and it's tough on kids, bikes, skateboards, that sort of thing. But even more important, that stone is always loose, and it loses stone over time, tends to pile up in people's yards, driveways, and when the county does it, there's a lot of complaints about that. Also, in the city, we've got storm sewers, so a lot of that stuff ends up collecting in the storm sewers, requires a lot more for cleaning. So the same benefit that chip sealing does on a county road is what we did with the slurry sealing on the 6 miles this year. That's the same type of technique. It doesn't add any structural value to the road itself. It simply is put on there to protect the pavement that's below. What we've been doing is actually spending more money on mill and fills, where we grind off a section of the road and pave it back. And so we're not doing 100% optimized asset management. If we were doing 100% optimized, we'd spend more money in crack sealing and more money in slurry sealing, quite honestly. What we've done is, per council's direction and what the street ad hoc committee's recommendations were, is we're trying to do a hybrid of that. So we're trying to go to those roads that the pavement is shot, but we still have good base below them, and trying to do those rehab projects now, and we're trying to spread those out. If it's got utility work that needs to be done below it, we're not doing those now. If we know that the base is bad, we're not doing that now. But we're trying to optimize as many of those as we can.
Jeff, how about Franklin and Fremont and Hastings on the north side? How do they compare to Quincy, and what would need to be done to some of those?
And if Ed can find the slide, those are all tabbed for storm sewer work. Because those are all areas where, when the sewers were separated, and the north side's kind of a hybrid. There were some areas that new storm sewer piping was put in. There's some areas where the catch basins were disconnected and the bottoms were taken out of them, and they just leach. And then when you get a heavy rain, they flood and they pond. Everybody probably knows where that puddle is on Fifth Avenue. Drives me nuts. But that's just one of those catch basins that's disconnected from the sanitary sewer, has the bottom knocked out of it. It slowly percolates into the ground.
Is that
Sometimes it takes
what's
days.
happening at Ford and Hughes? Is that one of those catch basin?
Ford and Hughes.
Is that a French drain, Jeff? On Fifth Avenue, basically?
Yeah, French drain's a little bit different, but it's basically a leaching structure. It just doesn't have the volume. You know, a lot of the storm sewer that's in Harbor Village on Lakeshore is actually leach basins, but they're just sized appropriately, and they're sandy soil, so it takes it.
And do you ever clean the one out on Fifth Avenue?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
How about a street like Hastings? Does that need any sewer?
Your question, Ford and Hughes?
Yeah.
That's where the blue lines are.
Right,
Help me,
that is.
Sean. Is that water main?
2020, what map are you looking at?
We're looking at the, let me zoom out on it here.
Ford, we had on the docket for 2021 as a,
Those,
Water main,
Ford
sewer,
and, yeah,
sanitary.
that's anticipated water main.
Okay, that's at Ford, the whole,
At Ford and Hughes,
Water main, yeah.
Hastings needs some sanitary work, or no, some storm sewer work. The green areas that are shown need storm sewer. The brown would be sanitary rehab.
and these are based on, some studies that were done.
Capital improvement plans have been completed over the years.
Over the past year, so, a lot of the storm and sanitary will be looked at again as part of the SAW, so we'll be updating these maps.
yeah, there's so many bad streets over there. Quincy obviously is a case by itself, but Hastings is really bad in spots, and Fremont and Franklin are really bad. And there's parts of the avenues that are really bad.
Well, and Hastings
How are we
is-
ever gonna get after all
Yeah,
this?
and Hastings is probably one of the worst in the city. I mean, there's absolutely no pavement on a portion of that.
Right.
And that needs some storm sewer work, but the storm sewer work typically is at the intersection. So that one could be done, but it has to be reconstructed because there's no base there. Each year Sean and I drive around and look at these, and we try to pull some from out of the there's no way list into the we think we can do it list. That section of Oak Street that we just completed, the base was poor underneath that, but we changed techniques a little bit, and instead of grinding off and removing pavement, we actually ground the pavement and mixed it back in with the base to beef it up. One end of it had real thin stuff, the other end had real heavy stuff. We balanced that out through the design work, and then leveraged the Reith Riley money since they were already adjacent to it, and we got that section paid for or rebuilt for $15,000. So we're always trying to look for those areas, but where there's utilities, we got to have the utility money to do it first.
So can you help me work through this in my mind? At what point does it become it costs so much to keep filling in cracks and filling holes, and the holes keep getting bigger, and at what point is it just more practical just to return it to gravel?
I can talk to that, Jeff, if you want.
Yeah.
We're not gonna go, I think there was a presentation, it was 64 slides or 100-some slides that was given on asset management.
Yep.
But there's a couple key ones I think that are worth, to get to your point. This slide right here is, it's a graph showing on the left-hand side the Paiser ratings. 10 being brand-new road, 1 being dust, turning to gravel. And and the way that the transportation engineers have looked at over years of collecting data is they say, we know what a road's gonna do. It's gonna, over 20, 25 years, it's gonna eventually fail if nothing's done to it. And so these lines on here, that green line starting here, shows kind of a typical road decaying with time. And a PASER rating of 4 kind of gets, I think, to your question. 4 is they call the critical distress point. It's where the road has failed so bad, you need to rebuild it. It's past, it kind of flips a switch and says, okay, we've crossed the line, it's so bad, we have to reconstruct it. And so what you're trying to do is keep these roads from passing through that PASER rating of 4. Because at that point, they're really at a loss. Now you're spending basically the maximum amount of money you can spend to fix it. If you do it before then, you can extend it. So like in this graph here, you can see at 15 years, they invested in seal coat. And that bumped the life of the pavement, didn't get it back to where it was originally, and they had to invest some money, less money than they would for full reconstruct, and they grabbed them a few more years out of the life of the pavement before it went through that critical distress point again. And you can keep doing that and extending it out. But so what happens is you got these groups that are above 4s that you're trying to keep from passing through them because it really gets more expensive. And then the ones we're talking about, all these terrible roads, are below that. And so we could work on those, but we're going to work on a couple blocks, and then we're going to wait till next year. And so you've got this balance between, trying to do microsurface work on 6 miles for $380,000 versus doing a block or two, for the same amount of money. And the asset management principles, like Jeff was saying, is they preach, if you go to right by the book, they say, spend all your money on, up front and do all your crack sealing. Okay, you have some money left. Now go through and slurry coat everything that you possibly can, all your candidates. Now go through and do mill and fills on the next run, and you work your way down, and the last thing you're really doing is reconstructs. But, that's almost impossible to do. We understand we got to hit some of these poor roads, so we're trying to work them in. We're working the mill and fills in. Quite frankly, we're stretching, to get the best dollars out of it. We're doing mill and fills on candidates that are really, quite frankly, borderline reconstructs, just to get a few more bucks, a few more road miles out of what we're doing. So it's, we're really, in my opinion, I think we are doing the right thing. I think a lot of other communities and asset management people in the business say we're definitely doing the right thing. But it's a hard pill to swallow when you have, 10, 15 miles of road out there that are in really bad shape.
And I don't want the utility work to sound like a curse. It actually is a blessing. A lot of our roads got rebuilt because we were separating sewers.
Sure,
And we've got heavy debt load for that, but some of that debt load's starting to drop off in a couple of years, and we'll be able to reinvest back into those pipelines. And some of those roads that need to be reconstructed, that's the time to do it, is when you're digging trenches and fixing the utilities anyway. So that's our plan in the capital improvement, is to keep marrying those together and leveraging a dollar against a dollar, finding every grant money that we can on projects and try to push it as far as we can.
I have a financial question. We recently approved the selling of city property. Now, I don't know how much money that will bring us in the long run, or in the short run. And I know we can't really dedicate that. It's to one thing or another. It's probably gonna go into the general fund. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any way, though, as a council, we can be aware of that so that when we do get money for the sale of property, we can look at that and decide whether we want to put it, say, in the local streets?
Well, number one, you will be aware of the sales because you'll have to approve each and every one. Okay, so you'll know when a parcel of property is going to be sold. Council can always designate funds within the fund balance, the fund reserve, for something, whatever it may be.
Well, my thought was that the purpose in selling city-owned property is to make sure that, well, number one, we sell it and we get it off our books as exempt property, and then somebody else is going to be paying some taxes on it. So the city is still reaping the revenue for new taxation into the general fund, but I'm thinking for a sale of the property, if we can be aware of that, we should be thinking about putting it maybe into streets.
And it's totally a council decision on what you want to do with that money, and that would be, something that you could look at in a budget year.
Roughly, what does it cost? Is it $1 million a mile?
Not quite
For
that, a
rehab.
lane mile, it
What?
might be 600,000-700,000 for a lane mile. Probably better look at, blocks. Quincy probably is a good example. It's about $350,000-400,000 worth of work. It's 900 feet of road to do that. Now that's full reconstruct, we're storm sewer, lowering the road section. And the size of it matters, 12th Street, that's a lot more expensive per mile, because it's a smaller project, has to be mobilized. And so that actually costs more per running foot than Quincy's gonna cost. But to reconstruct, you're talking, I don't have my glasses on, I apologize. But, I think that's per lane mile, it's around $800,000, Jeff.
Yep, 839,000.
And, and that's per lane mile, and then what does it say for block there, 100? I think that's a 330-foot block, it's a short.
105,000.
So 105,000 per block, and that's what I call a short block. It's probably the shortest block you have in the city, 330 feet. So.
That's pretty close to what 12th Street cost us.
When we talk about projects like Quincy Street, and we talk about, we're not doing the street because we've got sewer work that we need to do. And then we say, but the sewer work's not a priority. I get concerned about the time frame. If the sewer work's not a priority and we're not fixing the street, which is deteriorated to a pretty miserable state, when are we going to give it attention? And then the same thing goes, okay, we're gonna spend the majority of our money to keep good streets good as opposed to doing something about the worst streets in the city. I understand asset management, but people say, how long do I have to live with crummy streets when other people keep getting their streets upgraded and maintained?
I guess-
It's an issue with people
And
out there.
this is a 100-year problem that we can't fix in 5 years.
I understand that.
And so if we decided to only rebuild the worst streets right now, there would be very few of them that we could afford to do.
And what's the
And
dollar
then
amount?
To do the reconstructs?
Yep. Rough estimate.
We've quantified that.
I can quantify it pretty quick, but I don't have it at the tip of my tongue right
3
now.
million, 4 million?
No, you're talking, if you go, why don't you, Jeff, if you got the maps, or, go to the last one, it shows the reconstruction with storm sewer, those would be all the Paisley ratings that are 3 or worse. Actually, farther down, that'd be almost the last, I think this
The
is
last
the
one.
last slide. Okay, yeah, that's it. So, everything you see in red on this sheet here is a reconstruction candidate. So I can figure out what the miles of that, put some dollars to it, but it's not 3 and 4 million. That's probably closer to 10 million. I'm quite certain of that.
Plus the utility work.
Plus the utility work, that's the reconstruction work. So, we could just shift gears and then start picking away at these a block or two at a time, and it's a tricky thing is how do you get caught up? And then while you're picking away at those, all the rest of your other roads are, on their way down, headed towards, and you almost can't keep up with it because you're not keeping these other streets that are in this, 5 and 6 range, slipping down to 3s and 4s and getting on this map. So it's a tough thing when you got limited funds to manage.
And one thing to point out is the ad hoc street committee said, after the city's shown some progress, increased funding, maybe the state kicks in some funding, and maybe we ought to go back and consider really ramping up the revenue that goes into streets, if that truly is the community's priority. The only way to really do that is to do, there's two ways to do it. Both require raising more revenue through a millage. One is a bond. So you go out and you do a $10 million bond that's not a voted millage, but a capital improvement bond or whatever we would be able to do, where you can then try to get some millage for that, or you do a Headley override. And that was the preferred alternative. there's over 2 mils worth of room on a Headley override that would generate maybe in the neighborhood of $400,000 a year. And with that, you would still want to follow asset management principles, but you could start pecking away and accelerating maybe the repair of some of those poorer streets better. So it really depends on getting more revenue, because you can redirect the revenue that we've got and you can do a few blocks, but you will see on the PACER rating reports on an annual basis that the overall condition of the street network, which is what the asset management plan has as a goal to maximize, is going to start to go down.
Well, that's where I was going with, but I keep getting interrupted. Unless we ask the people to do a bond, and if this council is willing to say, where are you willing to have your taxes raised? We're gonna have to go stay the course. You know, and if you wanna ask the people if they wanna do a bond, ask them. Goes on the ballot.
I think the ad hoc street committee identified a need for about $600,000 a year just to maintain the current condition of the streets, not to improve anything. That was just to maintain it. And we struggled to get to that point. The first year after that, we did a budget with 500,000 as opposed to 600,000 in there because of other constraints and stuff. And there's been other options talked about. You know, I think it's an issue that we can't keep kicking down the road. We can't keep putting people off because they pay taxes and they deserve service and they deserve infrastructure. We have to coordinate the utility work that goes with that. We need to offer some sort of a time frame and some sort of plan of action to provide relief from the worst streets that we've got in the city. And I'm not talking about a total reconstruct, but what can we do to make it better for right now until we can really reconstruct it and do the right job?
There are very little techniques that you can do that are at all cost effective on a street that needs to be reconstructed. You can put in fact, that's what the city did for decades, is just did overlays. Every bad street, we just put an overlay on it, and you find that 5-6 years, all the cracks came back, and you've really wasted a lot of that money.
The poster child for that is Memorial Drive.
When the state come in.
Memorial Drive looked great for a year and a half after MDOT put
That's
an
what,
overlay
5
over it.
years old?
Yeah, it's not
5,
done
6 years
over.
old.
It's back to as bad as it was, if not worse. The only section of Memorial Drive that looks good is the section that MDOT actually reconstructed, redid the base right there for the first few hundred feet. And so if you go back to the curves, you know, that we showed here, you're gonna spend, you know, more money in the long term, which then makes the problem worse eventually. It kind of kicks that can down the road by just focusing on the poor streets, because all your good streets then fall apart, and then you've got to have really expensive treatments. I just want to address one other thing. We can do a bond, or we can do a yearly street work. Either one of those, beyond where we're at right now, absent some other big reprioritization of spending priorities in the general fund, is going to require a Headley override. A Headley override, that additional millage, is what's either going to fund an additional $400 and some thousand worth of work a year, or make a payment on a bond to accelerate that work. We can't vote a separate millage like townships can. It's got to be in the realm of a Headley override. We can assign that and say it's going to be used for the streets, but we can't have a new millage to do that. So that's got to be the focus. If you're going to talk about raising millage, that's the technique to do it. And then the question becomes, do you do a bond? You know, how much does $400,000 a year support in terms of a bond? So you can do the work over maybe 3 years and you make it do faster, but then you're servicing that debt for the next 20. Or do you say, okay, we're going to take that $400,000 and we're just going to fix, you know, we're going to earmark it for stuff each year and do it. And those are kind of your two choices.
I have a question for you, Mr. Bradford. I think the Ramsdale, the roof is almost paid for, isn't it?
It is paid off.
This year.
So can we redirect that money to streets?
Well, we've already reduced the amount of money coming from the capital improvement fund to streets and other priorities in there. So if you look at your budget, you'll see that that's dropped off and there's more money going to other things.
What about the marina? How close are we on that one?
Well, that debt has to be serviced. The marina hasn't shown significant progress in increasing its revenue, so that level of support will continue until such time the marina can generate more revenue, or there's some more money that comes in somehow to support that.
But part of the marina is ongoing debt, and that runs for a number of years yet, right?
Correct. That's what the
Once
capital.
that debt satisfied, they should be on a more break-even basis.
Yes, the amount of support for the marina that's coming in from the capital improvement fund roughly equals the annual debt service.
I think Councilmember Goodspeed brings up a very good point, that, you know, we're at a point with the streets where we need to do something, and maybe we need to start that dialogue, as you indicate, on, and start talking about the Headley override to get it done, because good streets are beneficial to everybody. You know, I like a good street in front of my house, and everybody else likes the same thing. They like it smooth, they like it well-serviced when it comes to wintertime. Crack sealing, you know, we used to partner with the County Road Commission for crack sealing. We didn't do that we did some this year, but we didn't do it last year. We crack sealed before we did the slurry coat, right?
Correct.
Why didn't we crack seal last year?
We didn't have, well, we used to partner with the road commission, and the road commission hasn't been interested in the last 3 years in partnering with us. And there wasn't enough to rent the equipment to what we had budgeted.
You do plan to do First Street this year, right? Crack sale?
I just got the list of candidates this morning from the engineers, so I don't know what streets are on those, but we've got all the eligible streets mapped out per the Paisley ratings, and we'll
I
be
keep
doing those
measuring,
in
I keep
September.
measuring the cracks. They're not getting any, they're not getting any smaller. It's amazing. That road isn't that street is not that old, and it's already.
You know, if council wants staff to bring back some information on funding options,
Yeah.
we can certainly do that. You know, one of the things that I would suggest, that if council is inclined to do that, we're gonna need a very good plan so that the community knows what they're getting, and something that we can measure ourselves by, where we say, if we generate this much money, this is how we're gonna use it, and we can, you know, even go to naming streets and just say, this is what it is, so the community knows, maybe I live on a bad street, I might not get it in this year, but 4 years down the road, it's in the plan. I think that's what's gonna take to sell it. So if that's council's, we can put some thought into what we would need and bring back some recommendations for council.
I think that'd be very beneficial. I mean, how much would it take? What kind of bond, you know, how long would it take the millage to run to satisfy repayment for that? You know, what could we achieve with more money? And certainly it has to be dedicated. And the last thing I want is to have something that's dedicated and then quit taking some of the money that we're putting into streets now and spend it on something else. You don't want to do a switch it routine on things. You want to keep the focus on funding and keeping the streets, because even if you fixed all the streets today, they still have to be maintained. There's still an ongoing expense in maintenance that's required.
I guess I'm confused. If we did a whole Headley override, we can't really dedicate part of that to local streets, can we?
Well, I think the city attorney has looked at that, and I think there's a mechanism. You can't, it's not like a voted millage for a specific topic, but you can put language in the Headley override that more or less accomplishes the same thing. It's kind of a legal parsing of it, but there'll be assurances to the citizens that that money that's generated by that override is gonna be put towards streets. And to the mayor's point about if something like that were to occur, and let's say it was an annual program rather than bonding, just for the sake of discussion, his point was we wouldn't want to see the money that's already coming from the general fund and from the capital improvement fund and wherever the other sources are, you know, transfers between major and
Diverted
local
to other
depending on the
items.
project, to diminish. And I agree, because we're making good progress. However, you know, council is gonna have budgetary challenges every year that they're gonna have to address. And there may be at some point where council decides that maybe some of those funds might need to be prioritized somewhere else. I'm speculating on that, but every year there seems to be different budgetary challenges depending on what's out there. So that's just something to keep in mind. But clearly, if there was Headley and it was voted on to go to streets, that money's gonna go to streets.
So Headley, we can do a Headley override without the vote of the people? Is that what
No.
you're saying?
You have to
No.
have.
Vote of the people, okay.
We have no more unlevied millage below our cap. There was about a point, I think about 0.8 mil,
We hired a police officer with
and that was used to fund a new police officer position a couple of years back.
Okay, thank you.
Question for Jeff. I think a couple years ago in the budget, a couple budgets ago, I think you had a want or a wish for a crack sealing machine?
We put in the budget to purchase a crack sealing machine and oil storage, and when we, and that was approved, and we went through and started getting quotes and prices, and almost every one of the companies, as asset management is growing, every one of the vendors that we talked to informed us that they had rental programs, and when we costed out, or when we looked at the cost of a rental program on an annual basis versus buying our own, it's almost the same exact dollars, except that we don't have to maintain the equipment. The other thing that we found is it was tough to source the oils that we needed, and it would be expensive to heat them. And one of the things that I was concerned about, honestly, is everybody that we talked to used one source of an oil supplier, but it felt a little bit hostage on that as a sole source, and I was worried about the purchasing policy. So in the bottom line, we did not purchase that equipment, so the money stayed in the street fund, and it just got repurposed for, obviously more pavement this year, and then we intend to rent that on an annual basis and train our guys to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, let's be thoughtful about this. I'm curious to see when that property that the city has designated for, that we could sell, what it's gonna appraise for, so that we have that knowledge as well.
And we're finalizing the request for proposal documents to get out, so we can the assistance of realtors. And that's one of the things that we're gonna be asking, is to have them take a look at what we think the value is and give us their opinion instead of price.
Any other questions or comments on transportation improvement plan? Not, we'll move on to discussion of blight ordinance and procedures requested by Councilmember Linda Beaton.
One of the things that made me feel favorable about Tyler Lebanon when we were going through his resume is I did some due diligence and discovered that he had made a online data entry form for blight complaints.
Yeah.
And I was pretty impressed with that, actually. And I would be interested maybe in having the city police department who handles blight complaints perhaps talk to Tyler about that. If we can manage those blight complaints more efficiently, maybe save some time and get people educated to fill out an online form for a blight complaint, that also takes the pressure off of us, because I don't know about everybody else sitting on council, but I get several calls about blight complaints in my area and what to do about them. So you feel bad because you can't really answer their questions other than direct them to the police department. And a lot of times they're reluctant to do that, but I think an online complaint form, and maybe we shouldn't call it a complaint form, but that's basically what it's gonna be, is something that is a little less personal, maybe a little bit easier for people to fill out, because it'll identify the areas that we want to look at for blight. That's one of my ideas. And then I would like to know what the police department's procedure is now, and so we've got some older complaints out there that have gone on for a while that I know of.
We'll have Steve address those
And I know this is
questions.
tough on the police department to manage all this, so I want to apologize up front about that.
You don't have to apologize, this is a tough issue. So basically what our process is there, obviously we all know that Doug Van Sickle is our blight officer. I just talked with Jeremiah Hayner, our other new officer. He's on the opposite side of the floating day afternoon shift. He agreed to take on some responsibility with Doug when he comes back. I'll manage that process. The issue we're having now is a lot of people are reaching out to the new chief to give him blight complaints. So I'm not being kept in that loop, but we're going to have that discussion because I need to know that just so I can reach out to Jeremiah. Manpower is, again, the biggest key to this factor. Our process for this basically starts out, if we get a blight complaint, there are probably, each week we probably get a couple. People will actually come in, fill out our form. We have a process of, usually we'll take a look at it, we'll go talk to them face to face. If we can't, we'll try to locate a phone number for who owns that property actually. Give them a call, talk to them about it, find out, give them a couple days, say, hey, I'm gonna stop by in a couple days to see what type of progress you have. Usually in a couple, 2 to 3 days, we'll go there and we have a form that we actually fill out. Let them know what their actual ordinance violation is, whether it's storage on their property or if it's rubbish or if it's blighted structure. We'll give them 7 days to either clean that up or come up with it. Obviously there are some areas that are going to take more than 7 days, and we ask them for a detailed plan on what they're going to do to clean this up and the time frame that they're going to have to do it. If and once they choose not to do that, we'll go into the process of issuing them a civil infraction citation on our municipal civil infractions. They pay it here at City Hall. The first offense is $100. If they don't clean it up that day, we can go back there the second day. So every consecutive day that we go back there, it's a $500 fine. We get to the point that they're not going to pay that through City Hall. We contact Mr. Saylor, our city attorney. We get a formal hearing set up through the district judge. That hearing process goes through. The judge will give them a certain amount of time to get that blighted structure or blighted property cleaned up. If they choose not to do that, we'll go back for a hearing in front of the judge, let him know that his orders were not fulfilled, and they'll give them another amount of time to get that cleaned up. If not, then we'll probably go in there and clean that up. And then I believe that would go onto their tax roll if the city gets involved in it, if I'm not mistaken. We haven't really got to that point except a couple demolitions of the house.
Something up, and I believe it ends up going on the taxes generally.
Okay.
Well, what I recall from Chief Botman when he was here last year, that he said that you guys only have time, I shouldn't say just guys, but the staff only has time to go out and look at things like trash on the property and unlicensed vehicles. Is that still happening?
Are we doing that? Is that your question?
Is that all you have time to do?
At this time, I would probably say that's a fair answer. We probably orange or red tag 30 to 40 cars a year, usually probably 30 in the spring and 30 in the fall. Good, about 75% of them to maybe 80% of them, people will pick up their cars. We have a few that will pick up their cars and they'll move it to another area in the city. That's the issue, that the game that they play. So the whole process starts over. Trash is a big problem. Normally they'll get that picked up, but without having, the biggest complaint that we hear is, when's the spring cleanup? They don't have no place to put it. They obviously, if they have the trash in their backyard, they don't have the money to take it to the trash. So then it becomes, can we just take it someplace else? Like the cars, the people that don't have the money for the cars to have them plated, insured, and road ready, can we move it to somebody else's yard? And then we go find it in another neighborhood. So the answer to that question is, at this time, probably with the manpower that we have, that's probably an accurate statement.
Okay. This is very similar to the street situation, if you think about it. Because when people think of blighted properties, they can see that trash can be removed, cars can be towed away. That's an easy fix. I mean, that's an easier fix than your siding's falling off your house, your roof is caving in, and you're a blighted piece of property on my block. And that's where people get annoyed, is to see that. I'm not sure how to cure that, because obviously a lot of people, there's gonna be people who can never afford to fix it, and I understand that. And a lot of their neighbors, if they're, talk to these people, they understand that they can't do it. But there's a lot of more vacant type properties that are also
Sure.
like that as well. So,
And sometimes them people that have the vacant properties, it's hard to reach out to find out who the owner is for them to get a call back to us, because a lot of them live out of town or out of state.
One of the things I've talked about was in next year's budget, including some amount of money for a part-time person to assist the police department as well as the DPW on the grass, and do a lot of the footwork to get out there and get up and down the streets and do some self-reporting of blight, and then gather the information they need, send out letters, make the initial contacts through that, and then involve a police officer at the appropriate time. I think there's a good chance that if we get the right person on a part-time basis, that person can handle a majority of the blight complaints through voluntary compliance, and then those that aren't being complied with, get the police department to help. So we're gonna look at where we can get some funding to do that in our upcoming budget.
do you think there'd be any value in having, putting on our website an online form?
Without a doubt, yeah, that would help in terms of identifying easily, an easy way for the community to report, I would think would
And it could be in
increase.
different categories that they could check off.
People I found are sometimes hesitant to do that. I've been contacted in 2 instances by people about concerns, and I've gone out and I've looked at the property and have gone to the police department myself and made a complaint in my name, because people feel anxiety about reporting their neighbor, or someone that's in the neighborhood. At some point in time, if you wanna fix it, you have to make a complaint.
It's like the fireworks. You know, if you know your neighbor's shooting off the fireworks illegally, you have to, if you want it to stop, you can report them.
I don't think a form, I'm sorry, I don't think a form on the internet's a bad thing. If people wanna fill it out, they can fill it out, and if they don't, they don't.
Can we make that emailable?
We'll have to take a look at what options we have.
Okay,
Yeah.
because, some people just don't wanna bring it in City Hall, easier to email.
We do get some emails throughout the week too on blight. So
I have to say that, and I've given the chief several blight complaints, and they've been knocked off, you know, and
the officers are
taken a
going
while.
out now singly and
Right,
taking care of
and
them.
it's, a lot of things have been cleaned up, so, my thanks.
I've gotten good response also.
One of the questions I would have as we're looking to design that form is whether or not you can allow anonymous complaints or not. And there's been some discussion at that, and in the past, we haven't allowed people to make anonymous complaints.
Oh, well, that's why they would fill it out online and send it in.
Right, but I mean, that was a discussion as whether that should be an option or not. What's the council's?
I
Well,
would
what's
I
the
don't know.
need for,
Don't you have to have a name to have a complaint?
Yeah, that,
You have to have a name to have a complaint.
well, you need to be able
No,
to.
no, no, the person submitting the complaint.
I understand that.
Right.
But you need to be able to check the veracity of the complaint, and it's always nice to have a complainant to go talk to if you want to sort out
Right.
the details.
Exactly.
Or if it just doesn't fit our guidelines as to what a blighted piece of property is,
Right, and it's difficult if someone, and I remember Chief Bachman saying this, is that, blight is in the eye of the beholder. If somebody does an anonymous online complaint and it doesn't meet the standards of the blight, you certainly would want to get back with that person and talk to them about it.
Because
So
if
I
somebody's
think-
mad at me, his grass was 6 inches this week, or you know what I mean, or his
Right.
kids left his bike in the yard for 4 days, you know what I mean?
That would be my recommendation, that there has to be a name.
Absolutely.
I would agree with that.
Name, address, and a contact information.
I totally, obviously, you know how I felt about that. You need a name.
Right.
And Tyler, if I embarrassed you, I'm sorry, but I did liked the form that you had designed for Owasso, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Did they sign the one in Owasso, Tyler? But was it signed? Did they put?
We did.
Okay.
We always told them it was anonymous complaint.
Okay.
Well, I think it just carries more weight if you have to have a name. That's my opinion.
Well, my personal opinion is I think that we need to spend more time with the actual blight by the building or the trash rather than the vehicles. Because, I mean, depending on what type of vehicle it is, but if you've got a newer vehicle that's not registered, I don't think that's going to throw the site of the property off rather than all the trash. Or I think I get a lot of complaints about, well, my property is not trashed, it's just not plated. And it's a nice vehicle, we just haven't been around to getting it.
Gotta be plated insurance though.
Yep, you gotta
it's-
take that
Gotta have
step.
plates insurance.
I mean, you gotta take that
But I
step to
think-
register the vehicle and license it, so.
Well, as in the view of it, the sight of it is what I'm considering blight, rather than, okay, yeah, you didn't, I don't see it as, unless it's a junk car, it's obviously junk, rather than it just nice
If
looking
you
car.
let the better car, for other words, go, and then you'll have a rusted bucket, people are gonna compare. You can't allow that. You just,
Comes
You
back
have
to
to- you
this,
have to-
somebody's trash is somebody's treasure.
right, and you
How
have
do we determine that?
You have to follow the policies.
I
You
would
can't pick
think,
and choose.
Connect the sides.
I would think that our city police department has a pretty good handle on if somebody's running into some hard times or some family issues
We
that,
do.
and they're going to use discretion when it comes to enforcing it. I would hope that would be the.
We try to
case.
give them some options, we give them some extra time, and like you said, there is some discretion out there. You know, last week or the week before, somebody had a unregistered vehicle on the street. I said, hey, if you can't get it registered this week, put it up in your yard, and I'm gonna come back next week. He thought that was the best thing, because it's off the street, so it's not a legal vehicle on the street, up in his yard, came back to the following week and it was gone. So sometimes they need I mean, we all know that plates and registration insurance are expensive, we all have to buy them.
But it's still blight if it's in the yard though, right?
Correct.
If it's.
We have some discretion on things like that. So it's not a safety issue being out on the street compared to some other ones.
Steve, I have a question, and if this is blatant, I can, poll the council members, and I've reported a few of these instances of leaking cars, especially on 4th Street. I mean, when 4th Street gets reconstructed or repaved, these cars, chances are they'll be there. That oil and gas and antifreeze is just going to deteriorate the pavement again. What do we have to put some teeth into an ordinance?
We do. I actually sat down with George Saylor one day, and we found some ordinances out there that we could probably push the issue on as far as vehicles leaking on the streets. I sent that out to the guys to, if we have any other complaints, to write that ordinance, to cite them. People may challenge that because it's somewhat vague a little bit to the court, but that's one thing. If we get a decision back from the judge that says it's a little vague, that we can go back and take a look at to straighten that policy or that ordinance up.
Yeah, 'cause I found one on Concord and 9th. They let the antifreeze just pour out of the car down the street. So it's
Absolutely.
maybe it'll take care of the deer. So
They can look into that.
Any other comments on blight?
Oh, I thought you were gonna say something about,
no, I'm gonna let it go.
okay.
Thank you again,
Good.
Sergeant Smollett.
Thank you.
May be the easiest item on the agenda tonight. Discussion on redevelopment liquor license. Mr. Leffernan.
If it's all right, my biggest thing as doing code enforcement in Owasso on complaint basis was that I would get complaints and I'd go to the house and there was a few pieces of garbage here and there, but on my way to that complaint, I would see a house that was just completely trashed, but you didn't get a complaint on that, so you didn't go to that one. But that's just my whole thing, but I know it's a funding issue. But anyway, on the redevelopment liquor licenses, it was just, I was taking a look at it when I first started, and it seemed more cumbersome, it is far more restrictive, or we require more information than what state law requires. So I'm just trying to make the process as easy as possible for people to invest and obtain a liquor license in the city, and in the downtown. I talked to Ann Arbor and Traverse City, which are much larger cities than Manistee, and their process was much easier to obtain a liquor license than Manistee. Just for example, currently somebody would have to submit a business plan, a 5-year pro forma, and then go to the redevelopment committee of the DDA, get approval there, and then go to the DDA board, get approval there. Then it'd be submitted to the public safety department and then to city council to be approved. So it doesn't need to go to the DDA at all based on the law. It can go directly from administrative review to city council for your approval. That would cut out, could be a month and a half of delay on a project. So I noticed when I sent it to Thad to be put onto the city council agenda, because at the board meeting they said that when the liquor license was established, that the city council had discussed the DDA coming up with a process to look at the policies, or to develop a policy and procedure for taking in the applications. And that's why it's before you today, because city council had asked the DDA to come up with a policy. We're changing the policy, so we just want to make sure it's okay with city council.
Looks fine.
Looks good to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Taylor, do you have anything else?
The only thing, just to remind council that I will be on vacation starting next Sunday for a week. I'll be out of town. As normal, I'll be available by email or cell phone. If you need something immediate attention, Ed Bradford has agreed to be the contact. So I won't be at the next council meeting, but we've intentionally kept the agenda light.
Thank you.
You can still add.
No.
Okay.
Mr. McCullough, do you have anything for us?
A couple things that Thad asked me to mention. We had a plug storm sewer line in the alley off of Division Street, just south of River Street, last weekend, and we found a broken pipe. We've done some repairs in that. It's actually, the repairs were done in the art garden, so if anybody saw that there was work going on, I think we've got that handled. And then we've been trying to put out on the Facebook website, story in the News Advocate, about the grass on the beach and then the high water levels and erosion. And I just want council and the public to know that we're trying our best to keep up with that stuff. It's taken a lot of effort, and depending on how the wind blows, as we cleaned the beaches Friday morning, we had guys come in and check them Saturday morning. They had to be cleaned again. Sunday, there was so much grass that had blown up and washed up on shore that the kids had built forts with the piled grass 2-3 feet high along the shoreline. And yesterday we removed 270 cubic yards of washed up grass.
The water is really high, isn't it?
Just from the edge of the shoreline. Yeah.
Where are we taking all that?
We compost it.
Okay. All right.
So the guys are doing a great job, I think, keeping up on it. And we'll just have to keep watching it. But
Could I ask you a quick question about Arthur Street?
sure.
It just, what's going on? I see there's kind of cordoned off a little bit.
Yep, there's, I think we brought this up this spring, or at least mentioned it to council, but some of the bedding stone underneath that wall, underneath the concrete block wall, washed out due to the high water levels again. It's settled. We noticed it this spring, and so we were going through a process of evaluating how best to fix it. And now, in the past month, we're seeing that those blocks are slipping much further, and it's starting to take some of the parking lot with it. So
Is there a chance of a cave in there, is what you're saying?
it is. I think it's an imminent chance of a failure where it could tip over and go into the lake. So we've put together a local contractor. We're working on an emergency permit application. We'll have that submitted tomorrow. And once the DEQ and the Corps of Engineers approve it, the state has already been here and said, yeah, you got to get in there and fix it right away. But we think that, within a week and a half, that we'll be able to repair that. And what we're going to do is add some protection, stone protection down at the base of it to try to prevent it from happening again.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else?
That's all for me. Thank you.
Mr. Bradford,
Nothing, Your Honor.
city engineer. Public safety. Okay.
I just had one question though. 4th Street, what happened for Steve? There's been a lot of rumors, a homicide? Is there anything you can share with us? I'm asking, I know there's been a lot of rumors around, is there anything that can be confirmed right now?
Right now, there is a press release out to the social media. Open investigation at this time.
I just received, or during the meeting, I received a copy of the news release. I can read that if you'd like.
Okay, I was just concerned that we didn't have anything yet, so.
No,
Could you forward that to council members?
we
Mr. Chairman?
certainly can. And I'm just double checking to see if you were part of the distribution list. I'm not certain. But, yeah, I just received this about 7:30, so we'll get it to council.
And I can comment